Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you this morning. In preparing for this keynote this morning, I did a little research on your community, and I flew in yesterday, and I'm so impressed. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Search Institute. Search Institute has been around since 1950s, but we are known best for our work as pioneers in positive youth development. And most of you would know us best through our work on the 40 developmental assets. And basically, on the 40 developmental assets, and you all have a green sheet that describes them, categorizes young people as basically having internal and external assets. The external assets would be the supports that are provided by their community, and internal assets focus on sort of the social and emotional skills that young people have. And this framework has been around for 27 years. We've had over 1 million students who've participated in surveys and thousands of adults who've participated in workshops around developmental assets. But something that kept coming up, and this is also a global initiative of several countries, 11 countries across the world. But something that kept coming up was, okay, we understand this developmental assets framework, but really, what do you do, though? What as an adult, what do I do to help a young person develop the internal assets and those social and emotional skills? And that actually led us to our next research area, which is around developmental relationships. So what we're going to talk about this morning is what are developmental relationships, why are they important, and most specifically, what you can do to build those kind of connections with young people. Okay. So this may be a blinding flash of the obvious to most of you, but relationships are really at the heart of how young people grow. And when we ventured into this area of research, we found that there was plenty of research there already to support it. And my personal favorite, though, came from research that's quite old, back in 1970. It basically says, every child needs someone who's really crazy about them. And I really believe that's true. Now, one thing that's important to know is that that person can be a member of the family, can be someone from the school community, or could be a member of the community. So these relationships, these adult relationships, can come from anywhere in a child's life. So something that a more recent piece of research that came out of the University of Pittsburgh talked about the effectiveness of practices, programs, and policies and relationship building, and basically said that for them to be effective, they really have to be built on a foundation of relationships. And so in the work that you do, it requires us to go beyond looking at the typical program quality measures. There's lots of folks who really are looking at, well, what's the content quality like? What's the participation rates? And many other things that really are important and foundational. But if you get all of these things right, but yet the relationships aren't being formed, the true impact of the programming on students really will be quite limited. So there's a lot of information that we gained on looking at relationships that was pretty eye-opening. A lot of our work really focuses on adolescent, and what we really found is there's a lot of work to do with relationships. So this is information that we gathered from a very large survey of over 100,000 students. And looking at family relationships, we found that over time, the relationships really degrade. And going from 6th graders to 12th graders, we find that in these 3 areas, getting along with your parents support you, and do your parents say they love you, that it's really declining. Now, we all know that parents love their kids, and parents are supporting their kids. And, well, the getting along, that probably is true from my own experience. But this is actually what the students say themselves. This is what they're experiencing. And looking at schools, it's even worse. Basically, 16% of 12th graders felt that their teachers cared about them or were challenging them to be their best. So lots of opportunity there. And there's more. In 2015, Robert Putnam, a researcher, had published a book called Our Kids. And he took this analysis a little further and looked at relationships across socioeconomic levels. And this 2/3 number is really important. So what he found is that in looking at children from families with higher levels of income and higher levels of parental education, that 2/3 of those children commented that, so the people who were surveyed were actually young adults. So they were 18 to 21-year-olds when they were being surveyed, and they were reflecting on their lives when between the ages of 8 and 18. 2/3 of the students who came from families with higher levels of income and education said that they had had mentoring, either formal or informal, during their childhood. On the other side, for these adults who came from families with lower levels of parental education and income, 2/3 of them said they had not. So basically, some of the children who probably need the most relationships in their lives to spur their success and thriving are the ones who are receiving it the least. So now, I'm going to ask you to do a little exercise. At your table, you have a handout. It's the Introduction to Relationships handout. And on page 3, there's a worksheet that says your relationships when you were growing up. What I'd like you to do is it's broken into 5 categories. And if you could think back to your childhood, back as early as you can think until you're 18, if you could think of adults who were in your life who basically were described in each of these categories. So you can put 1, 2, 3, but I don't want to tell you, as you do this, don't be surprised if a person shows up in multiple categories, and don't be surprised at all if no one shows up in a category at all. The first time I did this, I was pretty shocked myself. But obviously there's no right or wrong, but this is just a snapshot at this point in time of how you think relationships were when you were growing up. So let's just take about 3 minutes to do that. All right, so hold on to those sheets. We're going to come back to them in a little while. So up to this point, we've been talking about relationships in a pretty general sense. And now we're going to be a little bit more specific in talking about relationships. And one of the reasons we're going to do that is because some people believe that relationships between adults and children really take place because some people are just good at relationships. But basically, we know that that's not true. There's some very intentional things that happen in a relationship between an adult and a child to make it a developmental relationship. That is a relationship where the child grows and thrives because of that connection. And our working definition of a developmental relationship is basically what's in front of you now. It's these connections that children help them shape their identity, help them really understand their ability to shape their own destiny, and also help them learn how to be contributing members of society. So we call it agency, identity, and commitment to community, in summary. And what we call a developmental relationship is broken into 5 elements. Express care, challenge growth, provide support, share power, and expand possibilities. Now, the sheet that you just completed, looking at your childhood relationships, if you go back to that, that's exactly what those categories are. So that very first category is express care. And then they're in order. So that's your profile of how the developmental relationships really showed up in your life. So walking through them. Express care. It's pretty much what it sounds like. This is how an adult really lets a child know that I like you. I actually enjoy being around you. And in the work that we've done with people who work with children, this is the one that I find tends to come most naturally. So, and this is a quote from a young person. We have a couple of these quotes that came directly from the mouths of the young people, and you'll notice it in the grammar. But this is a young person talking about the mentor and how that mentor actually let them know that they really, really liked them and they were concerned about them. Okay? The second one, challenge growth. Really pushing the young person to get better. And that could be better in multiple ways. It depends on how you interact with them. I have to admit, this is the element that I have leaned on very heavily. My children would tell you I'm a big challenge growth person. And this is also one that I find is also challenging to people depending on how they know folks. Teachers sometimes tend to be pretty good at the challenge growth, for example, and sometimes parents are. But it's a pretty important part of the framework. Here's another quote from a different young person, and this is about a mentor and how they really called them to be more, to basically learn how to better show up. So this growth can be in areas like this, which is, kind of soft skills. This isn't about your math homework and things like that. The next one, provide support. So this one really is about providing those guide rails for kids to kind of help them kind of stay on track and doing what they're supposed to do. Another part of this is that this also is about advocacy for them. It's also about being the person that not only is making sure they are doing what they're supposed to do on time, but also supporting them when they need the support and they don't know how to navigate a situation, possibly with another adult. The fourth one, sheer power. And this is the one, by far, that is the most challenging, especially in home and school environments. This is the one where you basically don't, as the adult, guide the direction of what's going to happen in your relationship. And as we know, schools tend to be very much focused on keeping a schedule, and it's very directed by what the school has to accomplish. So schools who are able to do this have to be real intentional in using a different model. But in families, especially depending on the cultures that families have, sharing power is something that's very not natural. I can tell you in my home, very little sharing power took place. So it just wasn't the way things were done in my community. Examples of what sharing power could look like: being taken seriously, getting involved in decision making, kind of working with you to solve problems, and giving you opportunities to take action and lead. And the fifth, expand possibilities. And that's really about opening up the world of the child and helping them with experiences, and that could be places and people, helping them encounter them in ways that they never would be able to do them on their own. And an example of a young lady talking about someone who was a youth development worker in a program that she worked in, what that looked like. Okay, so we've talked about the developmental relationships and their importance in young people's lives. This research is a little bit different because this research is about children from the most challenging situations. So this is about children who have suffered abuse, neglect, violence, and live in war-torn areas. You know, think of children living in Syria. So basically, this research that was done in 2015 out of Harvard shows that basically one relationship from a stable, committed adult, as Tiffany was pointing out, it makes the difference between a child being able to survive and succeed even in those most challenging situations. And what we found in our research coming back here to the United States, one relationship is powerful, but also more is even better. So in looking at academic motivation, we found that it increases with the number of relationships that young people have. In development of social and emotional skills, again, it increases with the number of developmental relationships students have. In taking responsibilities for their own actions, again, increasing. And in the one we want to go the other direction, high-risk behaviors, they go down based on the number of developmental relationships in a student's life or a young person's life. Okay? So, now we're going to move to being really practical. And now we're going to talk about a vehicle for you to initiate or build on relationships that you have with young people in your life. And we call that sparks. So there's a handout that actually describes sparks. But basically, what a spark is, it's something that lights up a young person. Okay? It's a talent or skill or an interest area that really, they lose track of time when they are engaged in this type of work. Okay? And it's also something that many of us have. Sparks are not just for children. I have a spark, which is dancing, and I lose track of time. I suspect many of you have sparks also. But a spark is not a hobby. It could start off as a hobby, but it's more than a hobby. Categories that we've found in teenagers that had sparks were over a very wide range. Athletics, creative arts. The one I think that surprises people some is the one at the bottom, academic subjects. Some kids really do love math, and they like all things around math. Or they love, writing. So people often, that's one of the reasons why it's a point. No, it's not a hobby. They just love these things. But we can break down what sparks, how they categorize even a little more specifically into three groups. It's a talent or skill. It's something that they care deeply about, such as the environment, serving the community, or it's just a quality that they have, like caring for others. Some people's spark really is their family. It can be, caring for senior citizens. It can be caring for animals. So, not surprisingly, our research specifically around sparks shows that some of the very positive experiences and actions of young people increase based on their identifiable sparks. And, not surprisingly, the experiences and actions that are negative decrease with the number of with having identifiable sparks. So, what we believe is that the essence of this sparks is that when an adult really understands a student's spark and engages with him or her around it, it provides an opportunity for that young person to be seen, to be understood, and to be appreciated. I had a school leader once tell me that when you know a young person based on this something like a spark, it allows you to see them and interact with them in a way that's not based on your last experience with them, which might be because they are in the office because of a disciplinary issue, So you can see beyond that because you know them at a different level. So we're going to do another quick exercise. If you go back to your handout, what I'd like you to do is think about 3 children in your life. They can be any. They can be your own children, they can be children that you work with, or they can be children that are in your community. And I want you to write down their names, first of all, and then based on your knowledge of this young person, write down whether you think they have a spark or not, or one that you are aware of. And then if the answer is yes, then write down what you think that spark is. And then the last thing is I want you to say what your confidence level is in that spark that you identified. Right? And that's, basically high, medium, low. Okay, so let's just take a couple of minutes to see what sparks look like around you. Okay. So I want to tell you what we know about sparks in adults. Basically, most teenagers actually do, between 60 and 70% of teenagers actually have a spark. And we also find that even whether they have one or not, when it's explained to them, 100% are interested in sparks. They think that's a good idea. Then what we found, though, is that, as I said, between 60 and 70 can name the spark, but a pretty small percentage of them actually have a person that they consider a sparks champion. And that means a person who is connecting with them around that spark, right? Looking at parents, and I would say in our research, parents are the ones who are most likely to know their child's spark. In a survey that was done, and these are with matched pairs, so this is the same parent and child together. This isn't so their answers should match. We found that basically there wasn't as much concurrence of sparks as you would expect. So basically, this is an opportunity area for us to, even as a parent, but for sure as teachers and community members, to really know what our young people's sparks are. So there's some things, of course, that you can do to figure out what a spark might look like in a young person around with you. And it really does usually start with a pretty open-ended exploration, kind of like, seeing what really makes them happy. And then one thing that's really good is also sharing your spark, so letting folks know what it is that really lights you up, and really just being open for them. You certainly can't go up and say, so tell me what your spark is. This is a spark. That won't be an effective way. We started this conversation with developmental relationships, and I want to go back to how sparks tie into those 5 elements of the developmental relationship. So in expressing care through sparks, if you've taken the time to know a young person's spark, right, it shows, first of all, that you can see them, but it also gives you that information that for the next time you see them, have something to talk to them about, right? Youth development workers, I find, are pretty good at this. They kind of know you find that thing and you keep asking about it, and the child knows, and they open up with you. So that expressing care through knowing the spark is a really good idea. And also going that next step of asking, trying to encourage them to keep doing more of it, whatever it is. As far as providing support, this is the way where you actually can sort of remove the barriers from the students. So kind of help them find ways to express that spark, which might have some trouble. If, for example, they had a spark that they needed resources, they needed to have access to an art studio and it was a limited amount of time, or they really want to participate in something but they didn't really know how to work that out, you provide support to help them really do that. Challenge growth. So this one really depends on what the spark is, but it's really a great opportunity to help the young person with goal setting, It could you kind of figure out how they can sort of themselves personally grow that spark, take it to the next level. It's also an opportunity to help them think about how that spark is actually going to contribute to the world. So how, it's not necessarily their own personal growth, but how it's actually going to make a difference. Sharing power. Well, this one is you can go share the spark with them. Depending on what it is, go participate in it with them. And also let them be the teacher. So that's a great opportunity for sharing power. Let them lead in that particular case. And the expanding possibilities, really helping them reach other people who may share their spark, or actually use it as a building block. So maybe their interest may be in one area, but you can kind of see how that's opening the door to take them someplace else, but really opening those doors for them through their spark. So I want to tell you a story because, as you've noticed, a lot of what I was talking about was teenagers and sparks, because it's really, our research has really been around adolescents, and it's easier to see those sparks in older youth. But I really want to tell you a story about a very young person and their spark. This is Ryan Hurljack. He's a Canadian, and his story began when he was a first grader, and he had a school assignment to look at water quality across the world. And what basically he found out in this is that there were a lot of people and a lot of children who didn't have access to clean drinking water. And he sort of took it upon himself to start raising money to build the wells so that these children could have clean drinking water. And he started off and got $70, which wouldn't build a well, obviously. But his enthusiasm and his persistence was really noticed by the people, his parents, his teacher, and they started having fundraisers. And Ryan, at the age of 7, and as a second grader, actually had led, with the help of many adults, the funding of a well in Uganda. And that top picture is the 7-year-old Ryan in Uganda, and a big celebration where the well was unveiled. Ryan did not stop there. Ryan went on to the university and studied so that he would better be able to continue that work. And to this day, he has the Ryan's Well Foundation. And Ryan's been on the Oprah show, okay? So, he really took what is truthfully a spark, started when he was quite young, nurtured by a lot of adults, and has made a difference. Over 750,000 people have access to drinking water as a result of Ryan's Wells Foundation. And Ryan talked about how, this started because his teacher was the first person. It was the one who kind of opened the door to this knowledge and then encouraged him to keep going with it. So what I'm basically telling you is that this sparks can be a very powerful tool for forming the developmental relationships with young people. And we don't have to try and create a Ryan Hurljack. It can just help kids be successful. You don't have to go that far, but you really have the ability to do that. And the sheet of paper that you created with the 3 children's name, I want you to think about that. So if you have 3 children, they all have sparks, and you know it, and you're confident, I actually want you to go check that. Go check that with the children, because I think it's a good chance that you might not have gotten all of them right. If you had any trouble at all even coming up with the children, or had some uncertainty about their sparks, there's an opportunity for you. But sparks is really just one way of being able to form these kind of connections that we know are so important for the development of the kids. I also want to just refer to you that in your handout, it shows the developmental relationships framework. And there's a box at the bottom, and we have a download that's available to you, and you will be able to get much more information than I've shared with you this morning. It's from a download called Relationships First, and it has a lot of practical ways also on relationship building in different contexts in family and community and school. So it has been my pleasure to talk to you this morning, and really do go out and build those relationships and those connections with the young people.